There is a subtle, persistent weight that accompanies the modern human experience, a quiet, underlying tension that rarely finds its way into daily conversation, yet governs almost every aspect of our waking lives. It is the sudden, disturbing realization that despite all our intellect, despite our relentless analysis, higher education, scientific advancement, and conscious ambition, we often remain complete strangers to our own inner lives. We move through the world with a profound sense of psychological division, as though an invisible, impenetrable sheet of glass stands between the persona we present to society and the vast, untamed landscape that exists just beneath the surface of our conscious thoughts. We find ourselves repeating the exact same emotional mistakes across decades. We fall into the same destructive relationship dynamics, collapse into the same familiar spirals of self-doubt, and react to external triggers with sudden, disproportionate intensity. And yet, after the emotional storm passes and the dust settles, we are left standing in the ruins of our own behavior, asking the same fundamental question: why did I do that? What part of me took control? What hidden mechanism inside my own mind just hijacked my life? For centuries, post-industrial culture has conditioned us to treat the human mind like a linear machine. We operate under the stubborn, ego-driven illusion that the conscious mind, that small, vocal part of your psyche that plans, worries, calculates, and maintains your social identity, is the absolute ruler of your internal house. We have been taught to view the unconscious mind as nothing more than an empty basement or a digital waste bin, a silent, dusty storage unit where forgotten childhood memories, useless sensory data, and repressed impulses are locked away, never to see the light of day. We believe that if we do not think about something, it ceases to exist. When Carl Jung looked into the depths of human suffering during his years at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich, he recognized that this hyper-rational view of the mind was not merely an innocent philosophical mistake, it was a catastrophic psychological disaster. The unconscious mind is not a dead, passive filing cabinet. It is a living, breathing, highly dynamic ecosystem. It is an ocean of autonomous energy, teeming with ancient instincts, profound creative potential, and powerful, pre-existing psychological structures that Jung identified as the archetypes. The unconscious does not speak the language of modern logic, linear time, or spoken words. It speaks in the ancient language of symbols, myths, raw visceral emotions, and vivid somatic sensations. When we ignore this vast subterranean world, it does not simply wither away, starve, or vanish into the void. Instead, deprived of conscious recognition and respectful engagement, it begins to operate from the shadows. It influences our choices under the cover of darkness. It quietly sabotages our long-term plans, dictates our romantic attractions, generates unexplainable physical tension, and shapes our ultimate life path without ever asking for our conscious permission. As Jung famously and starkly warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The invisible glass wall that isolates us from this deeper reality was built brick by our modern obsession with absolute rationality. Modern society rewards logic, efficiency, speed, and surface-level functionality above all else. We have been conditioned from early childhood to measure our worth solely by our productivity and our external achievements. Consequently, we have been thoroughly trained to dismiss anything that cannot be immediately measured, logically explained, or monetized. We brush off our vivid, unsettling dreams as nothing more than random neurological noise or chemical misfires in the brain. We suppress our sudden, profound intuitive flashes because they lack empirical proof. We actively silence the dark, uncomfortable, or chaotic feelings that bubble up during the silent, solitary hours of the night, labeling them as useless psychological glitches or inconvenient symptoms to be quickly medicated, distracted away, or buried beneath an endless stream of digital noise. In doing so, we commit a silent, tragic act of self-mutilation. We sever our connection to the deep instinctual roots that keep us psychologically grounded. By exiling the chaotic, dark, and irrational elements of our inner universe, we starve ourselves of the very raw, organic material required to build genuine psychological wholeness. We become hollowed out versions of ourselves, functionally successful on the outside, but deeply alienated and anxious on the inside. To break through this glass wall requires a radical, uncomfortable revolution in how you relate to your inner universe. You must stop viewing your mind as a single, monolithic entity and begin perceiving it as what it truly is: a vast, complex internal theater populated by distinct, autonomous inner forces. The recurring feelings of unexplainable anxiety, the sudden surges of irrational rage, the haunting grief, or the heavy, suffocating sense of unfulfilled potential that disrupt your peace are not random glitches in your brain's hardware. They are long ignored communications from the deep. They are abandoned fragments of your total self, knocking on the heavy doors of your conscious mind, demanding to be recognized, understood, and integrated. The descent into the self does not begin by trying to force your mind into rigid discipline, nor does it begin by forcing your chaotic emotions into submission through sheer willpower. It begins with radical, quiet curiosity. It begins on the day you finally summon the courage to sit in absolute silence. Drop the defensive armor of your rational ego and look directly into the quiet darkness beneath your thoughts to ask a single, serious question. Who is down there waiting for me? In the winter of 1913, Carl Jung found himself standing on the edge of a terrifying psychological precipice. His bitter, public split from his mentor Sigmund Freud had left him intellectually isolated, stripped of his academic standing, and deeply shaken in his core beliefs. During this period of intense loneliness, the floodgates of his unconscious mind burst open. Jung began experiencing an overwhelming barrage of vivid waking visions, terrifying dreamscapes, and chaotic emotional waves that threatened to sweep away his conscious identity entirely. To a conventional psychiatrist, these intense phenomena were clear warnings of an impending psychotic break. Most people, terrified by such an invasion from the deep, would have done everything in their power to suppress the visions, distract themselves, or retreat into rigid denial. But Jung made a radical, courageous decision that would forever alter the history of depth psychology. He chose not to run from the storm. Instead, he made the deliberate decision to step directly into it. He sat down in his quiet study at Küsnacht, intentionally lowered the defensive barriers of his rational ego, and voluntarily dropped into the unknown depths of his own mind. He recorded every vision, every dialogue, and every symbolic encounter in a leather-bound volume that would eventually become famous as the Red Book. Jung did not merely observe these psychological events as a detached scientist, he participated in them with his whole being. Through this brutal, transformative self-experimentation, he developed the cornerstone technique of analytical psychology: active imagination. Active imagination is not passive daydreaming, nor is it creative visualization. Understanding the distinction between these states is vital if you intend to practice the art safely and effectively. In passive daydreaming, your conscious ego is asleep at the wheel. You are swept along helplessly by mindless fantasies, anxieties, or wishful thinking, acting as a passive victim of whatever random thoughts drift through your brain. In creative visualization, the opposite problem occurs. Your conscious ego acts as a dictator. You deliberately construct the scene, control the characters, decide what happens next, and force the story to conform to your conscious desires. Active imagination exists in a delicate, powerful middle ground. It is an unscripted, waking dialogue between your conscious ego and the autonomous figures of your unconscious mind. It requires you to maintain a state of relaxed vigilance, remaining fully awake, ethical, and grounded in your conscious reality, while simultaneously relaxing your mental control enough to allow the unconscious to express itself without interference. To open this portal, you must first create a quiet, undisturbed sanctuary. You eliminate external distractions, sit in physical stillness, and turn your attention inward. The process begins by capturing a single thread of raw psychological material. This thread might be a heavy, persistent emotion that has been haunting your days, such as an unexplained sense of grief, a sudden flare of irrational anger, or a deep, suffocating anxiety. Alternatively, it might be a striking visual fragment from a recent dream, or a mood that feels impossibly dense. Instead of analyzing this feeling with your logical mind, You hold it gently in your awareness. You invite it to take a visual, personified shape in your mind's eye. You do not force an image to appear. You simply wait in the dark with patient curiosity, allowing the psyche to present its own symbol. Slowly, out of the shadows of your imagination, a figure will begin to coalesce. It might manifest as an intimidating, dark stranger, standing on a desolate shoreline, an ancient woman sitting beside a dying fire, a wounded animal, or a strange, mythic creature. Once the figure stands clearly before you, the true work of active imagination begins. You do not analyze the figure from a distance. You do not try to explain it away with psychological theory. You step forward and speak to it directly. You address it as a living, autonomous entity. You ask it clear, honest questions. Who are you? Why have you appeared to me now? What hidden truth do you carry that I have refused to see? And then comes the most difficult phase for the modern, hyper-rational mind. You must drop your defenses, maintain total stillness, and listen. You allow the figure to answer in its own voice, with its own distinct perspective, even if what it says shocks, challenges, or deeply uncomfortable your conscious ego. You do not censor its words. You do not force it to say what you want to hear. You participate in the conversation as an equal partner, expressing your own genuine feelings, fears, and boundaries, while according the inner figure the exact same respect you would offer a living human being sitting across from you in the room. To preserve the integrity of the encounter, you write down the dialogue word for word as it unfolds, or paint the images that emerge, bringing the invisible contents of the deep into tangible, concrete reality. Through this sacred portal, fantasy is transformed into a real, transformative encounter. You cease to be a passive bystander in your own mind. You step into a living, dynamic conversation with the mysterious forces that shape your character, your choices, and your ultimate destiny. When you dedicate yourself to the practice of active imagination over time, a profound shift occurs in your understanding of the self. You quickly realize that the inner figures you meet in the quiet space of your mind are not random, chaotic figments of your personal memory. They possess an immense weight and timeless quality that feels far older than your personal life story. You have traveled past the personal unconscious and crossed into the realm of the collective unconscious, the vast, shared reservoir of human experience, populated by the primordial patterns Carl Jung identified as the archetypes. To meet the archetypes in active imagination is to stand face to face with the structural pillars of the human soul. They are the eternal motifs, the cosmic blueprints, and the instinctual energies that have governed human behavior, mythology, and religion since the dawn of consciousness. The first major figure you will invariably encounter on this inner pilgrimage is the shadow. The shadow is the personification of everything you have denied, rejected, or hidden away about yourself in order to be accepted by your family and society. It contains your unexpressed aggression, your forbidden desires, your suppressed wildness, and your unlived passions. Because we spend our lives running from these disowned parts of ourselves, the shadow almost always appears in active imagination as an intimidating, hostile, or deeply disturbing figure, a dark pursuer, an outcast, or a threatening stranger. But Jung repeatedly emphasized that the shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply unrefined, unintegrated energy. When you find the courage to sit with your shadow in open, compassionate dialogue, you discover a shocking truth. Beneath its frightening exterior lies the very vitality, instinctual wisdom, and boundary-setting power you need to stand firm in the world. If you push deeper through the shadow realm, you encounter the bridge to your spiritual depth, the anima in men or the animus in women. The anima is the archetype of the inner feminine within the male psyche, embodying emotion, intuition, creative flow, and relational depth. The animus is the archetype of the inner masculine within the female psyche, embodying focused clarity, decisiveness, boundaries, and structural drive. When we remain unconscious of these internal partners, we project them onto the people around us. We fall hopelessly in love, not with real human beings, but with our own projected archetypes, demanding that romantic partners complete our internal void, a dynamic that inevitably leads to resentment and disillusionment. But when you engage the anima or animus directly within active imagination, you reclaim your internal opposite. You cease seeking completion from the outside world because you have established an enduring marriage within your own soul. As your journey continues, other ancient guides will step out from the fog. You may meet the wise old man or the great mother, figures of immense spiritual authority, maternal nurturance, and timeless wisdom that appear precisely when the conscious ego has hit a wall and feels completely lost in the wilderness of life. And presiding over this entire inner universe, orchestrating the dialogue between light and dark, stands the supreme archetype, the self. The self is not the ego. The self is the organizing center of the total personality, the divine blueprint within you that constantly coordinates your psychological growth, pushing you toward integration, harmony, and what Jung called individuation. Individuation is the ultimate goal of Jungian alchemy. It is not about reaching flawless perfection, nor is it about escaping into spiritual abstraction. Individuation is about achieving wholeness. It is the arduous, lifelong process of bringing the vast, dark richness of the unconscious into the clear light of conscious awareness, weaving the fragmented pieces of your psyche into a single, unified masterpiece. When a session of active imagination comes to a close, your work is only half finished. An encounter with an archetype carries immense psychological charge, and if it remains purely imaginary, it will fade like a fleeting dream. You must anchor the experience in the physical world. You must translate your inner revelations into ethical, real-world action. If your shadow revealed during your dialogue that you are living a coward's life in your career, you must take real steps to set firm boundaries or seek a new path. If your anima showed you that you have starved your creative spirit, you must physically pick up the brush, the pen, or the instrument. You must honor the inner encounter through concrete changes in how you live, how you love, and how you show up in the world. By stepping through the portal of active imagination, confronting your archetypes, and integrating their wisdom into your daily existence, you break the spell of unconscious repetition. You cease to be a passive leaf, blown around by the chaotic winds of fate. You become the conscious architect of your own psychological liberation, forging the philosopher's stone within the living furnace of your own transformed mind.